The massive stone halls of the Galactic Council had stood for over 10,000 years. But today they shook like leaves in a storm. The reason wasn't an earthquake or some natural disaster. It was fear pure. Cold fear that ran through every alien. Being gathered in that ancient chamber, Ambassador Vexta stood at the center podium, her body made of living crystal that normally glowed with calm blue light, but now red warning patterns flashed across her surface like lightning bolts. She had been the bearer of bad news before, but never anything like this. The holographic star map floating above them told a story of horror where bright points of light should have marked thriving worlds full of billions of lives. There was only empty black space system after system had simply vanished, snuffed out like candles in the wind. 17 entire star systems. Vexta's voice rang out in harmonics that created beautiful music. Even while delivering terrible news, gone in just 3 galactic cycles, the Void Swarm continues its march through the Outer Rim territories, and nothing we throw at them even slows them down. Council leader Thyman sat on his floating platform, his 8 thick tentacles curling and uncurling with nervous energy. His people, the Zilani, had ruled parts of the galaxy for 5,000 years. They were known for their wisdom and calm thinking, but today, even Thyman looked scared. The Void Swarm wasn't like any enemy the galaxy had ever faced. They weren't another species looking for new planets to colonize or resources to steal. They were something far worse. They consumed everything: planets, stars, space stations, entire civilizations. They ate it all and grew stronger with each meal. Our best energy shields last maybe 10 minutes against their bioships, reported General Vorth, a tall, thin creature whose people had been warriors for centuries. They adapt to our weapons faster than we can modify them. Every tactic we try, they learn and counter within hours. The Void Swarm ships were living things, part machine and part creature. They could change their armor to resist whatever weapons hit them. Laser beams that worked perfectly in the first battle became useless. In the second, plasma cannons that destroyed their scouts had no effect on the main fleet. It was like fighting an enemy that became immune to everything you used against them. Melder, the oldest being on the council, slowly rose from his seat. His ancient voice was barely a whisper, but in the dead silence of the chamber, everyone heard him clearly. There is one option we haven't discussed, he said, his words making several council members shift uncomfortably. The forbidden option. Everyone knew what he meant, even though nobody wanted to say it out loud. For almost 200 years, the Galactic Council had kept one star system completely isolated from the rest of the galaxy. That system was called Sol, and it contained a small blue-green planet called Eartha. Humans living on that planet had been quarantined for good reason when the galaxy first made contact with them. The humans had been in the middle of their Third World War. They fought with weapons that used nuclear fusion to create explosions that could level entire cities. They had weapons that could poison the air and water for generations. Most shocking of all, they seemed to actually enjoy fighting. The humans are barely out of their own solar system. General Vorth protested. They just figured out faster than light travel last year. What could such primitive creatures possibly do that our advanced civilizations cannot? But even as he spoke, another light winked out on the star map. The Helix Alliance's last stronghold in the Tau sector had fallen. 3 billion lives gone in an instant. The debate continued for hours. Some council members argued that contacting the humans would be a mistake. Others pointed out that the humans were known for their violence and unpredictability. What if they decided to side with the Void Swarm? What if they saw the galaxy's weakness and decided to conquer it themselves? But as the debate raged on, more lights disappeared from the map. The Void Swarm was moving faster now, consuming systems at an alarming rate. At this pace, they would reach the galaxy's core worlds within months. Finally, Council leader Thyman called for silence. His tentacles had stopped their nervous writhing and now hung still, a sign that he had made his decision. The choice is simple, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of history. We can maintain our pride and face extinction with dignity, or we can swallow that pride and ask for help From the only species in the galaxy that seems to love fighting as much as the Void Swarm loves consuming, the vote was close. Closer than any decision in the Council's long history, but fear won over. Pride by a margin of just 3 votes, the Galactic Council authorized the sending of a distress signal to the quarantined Sol system as the communication array powered up to send humanity's first official message from the galaxy beyond their solar system. Thyman whispered a prayer to whatever cosmic forces might be listening. May the universe forgive us for what we're about to unleash. Admiral Jack Morrison had seen plenty of strange things in his 30-year military career, but nothing quite like the alien message that kept playing on the main screen of his battleship. The UES Retribution was humanity's pride and joy, the first warship designed specifically for deep space combat, and Morrison had been chosen to command her maiden voyage beyond the solar system. The bridge was buzzing with activity as teams of linguists and computer experts worked around the clock to decode the alien transmission. It had taken them 72 hours of non-stop work, but they finally cracked it. The message was simple, desperate, and absolutely terrifying. Help us. The Void Swarm has consumed 17 star systems. Billions are dead. Our weapons are useless. Please respond. Morrison watched the translated message scroll across his screen for what felt like the 1000th time. His weathered face, marked by years of military service, showed no emotion. But inside, his mind was racing. For 2 centuries, humanity had been essentially prisoners in their own solar system, banned from traveling beyond by the same Galactic Council that was now begging for help. Captain Kelly Hayes stood beside him, her hands moving quickly across the tactical display screens. She was one of the youngest ship captains in Earth's fleet, but also one of the smartest. Her screens showed weapon systems that would probably give the peaceful aliens nightmares if they knew what humans had been building during their long isolation. Admiral, I have to remind you that the Galactic Council made it very clear we weren't welcome in their space, Hayes said, though her tone suggested she was just following protocol rather than actually objecting. They put up those warning buoys around our solar system for a reason. Morrison let out a short laugh that held no humor. Captain, they called us violent primitives and told us to stay in our corner of the galaxy. Now they're crying for help because something nastier than them showed up to the party. He paused, studying the tactical data they'd managed to gather about these Void Swarm creatures. Besides, when has humanity ever been particularly good at following orders, especially from people who look down on us? The data about the Void Swarm made for disturbing reading. These weren't just aggressive aliens looking to expand their territory. They were something far worse, living ships that consumed entire worlds and grew stronger with each meal. Nature allowed them to adapt to any weapon used against them, making conventional warfare practically useless. But as Morrison studied the enemy specifications, he found himself smiling. The galaxy's advanced civilizations had developed elegant energy weapons and sophisticated defensive systems. They fought wars like gentlemen, with rules and honor codes. The Void Swarm had adapted to counter all of that refined military technology. They hadn't adapted to deal with humans within 6 hours of decoding the distress call. Earth's orbital shipyards were in full production mode. The announcement went out across all military channels. Task Force Terra was being assembled for humanity's first extrasolar combat mission. 50 ships would make the journey, ranging from massive battleships like the Retribution down to fast attack destroyers built for hit-and-run tactics. Ships themselves would have horrified the peace-loving Galactic Council. Human military engineers had spent 2 centuries designing weapons with one goal in mind: maximum destruction with minimum complexity, while alien civilizations created beautiful energy beams and elegant plasma projectors. Humans built railguns that could fire metal slugs at incredible speeds, nuclear missiles that could crack small moons, and kinetic bombardment systems that essentially dropped heavy objects from orbit at devastating velocities. The galaxy called human technology primitive, but there was something to be said for the effectiveness of just hitting your enemy really, really hard with simple Reliable Weapons Commander Danny Rogers was checking his destroyer's weapon systems when the launch order came through. The UES Defiance was loaded with enough firepower to level a small city, which by human standards was considered a light combat. Lode Rogers had been itching for real action ever since graduating from the Naval Academy, and this looked like it would be anything but boring attention all crew. Rogers announced over the ship's communication system, his voice carrying the confident tone that had made him popular with his sailors. Were about to make first contact with hostile aliens, rescue some grateful civilizations, and show the galaxy what human diplomacy looks like when we're really motivated. His weapons officer, Lieutenant Tom Bradley, looked up from his console with a grin. Sir, are you referring to the kind of diplomacy that involves nuclear warheads? That's exactly the kind I'm talking about. Lieutenant, the destination was a planet designated Kepler-4 for to be, were the last forces of something called the Helix Alliance were making their final stand against the Void Swarm Advance Intelligence. Reports suggested the planet had maybe 3 days before being completely overrun. Task Force Terra would arrive in 6 days at maximum speed. Was going to be close. But Morrison had faith in human engineering and human determination. They had been called primitives and savages, banned from galactic society for their violent nature. Now that same violent nature might be exactly what the galaxy needed to survive as. The task force powered up their faster-than-light drives and prepared to leave Earth's solar system for the first time in 200 years. Morrison stood on his bridge and smiled grimly. The galaxy was about to get its first real introduction to humanity, and it was going to be explosive. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over the crystal cities of Kepler 442b. When the final assault began, Ambassador Vexta stood on the observation deck of the Planetary Defense Center, her crystalline body flickering with nervous energy as she watched the sky fill with nightmare creatures. The Void Swarm had been circling the planet for days, like vultures waiting for their prey to weaken. Now they were done waiting. Massive bioships, each one the size of a city block, descended through the atmosphere with the grace of falling mountains. Their surfaces rippled and shifted, organic armor, adapting in real time to the weapons being fired at them from the ground. The Helix Alliance had thrown everything they had at these creatures. Beautiful streams of concentrated energy lanced up from defensive batteries, each beam precisely calibrated, and perfectly aimed plasma cannons fired elegant bursts of superheated gas that could melt through starship hulls in seconds. Ion projectors sent cascading waves of charged particles that should have disrupted any electronic system, but the Void Swarm just absorbed it. All their biomechanical hulls shifted and changed, developing immunity to each type of weapon within minutes of first contact. What had once been cutting-edge military technology became as useless as throwing stones at a mountain. General Korth, commanding the planetary defense, turned to Vexta. With despair in his voice, Ambassador, we need to begin evacuation procedures. The shield generators will fail within the hour. That's when the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. 50 human warships materialized in space like avenging angels, their hulls scarred and battle-worn. Even though they had never seen real combat, these ships looked different from anything the galaxy had ever built. Where alien vessels were smooth and elegant, human ships were blocky and practical, covered in armor plating and bristling with weapon systems that served only one purpose: destruction. Admiral Morrison's voice crackled over all communication frequencies, speaking in the calm tone of someone who had been preparing for this moment his entire life. This is Admiral Jack Morrison of the Terran Defense Force. To all Helix Alliance vessels, I strongly recommend you clear the engagement zone immediately. We're about to go loud. The Helix ships, confused by the strange human expression, began moving away from the combat area. They had barely cleared the danger zone when the UES Retribution opened fire. The first weapons to launch were nuclear-tipped torpedoes, a technology so crude and primitive that the Void Swarm's adaptive systems didn't even recognize them as weapons until it was too late. The bioships had spent millions of years evolving defenses against energy weapons, plasma beams, and exotic particle streams. They had never encountered anything as simple and devastating as controlled nuclear fusion. The explosions lit up the space around Kepler-4, for to be like a chain of miniature suns, where moments before, there had been dozens of void swarm attackers. Now there was only burning debris and confused biomatter, trying desperately to regenerate. Captain Kelly Hayes stood on the bridge of her heavy cruiser, watching her tactical displays with the satisfaction of an engineer whose design had worked exactly as intended. Her railgun systems were spinning up to full power, electromagnetic coils charging with enough energy to accelerate metal projectiles to incredible speeds. Firing solution locked and loaded, she announced to her crew. Target the big one in the center. Let's show these things what happens when you bring bio-armor to a kinetic fight. The railguns fired with a sound like thunder, launching tungsten rods that had been accelerated to 30% of light speed. These weren't sophisticated weapons with complex targeting systems or advanced warheads. They were just very heavy pieces of metal, moving very, very fast. The physics were simple and brutal. When an object moving at 30% light speed hits another object, the results are catastrophic, regardless of how advanced the target's defenses might be. The tungsten rods punched through the void swarm's adaptive armor like it was made of paper, creating massive holes that the creature's regenerative systems couldn't repair fast enough. The largest bioship, a command vessel the size of a small moon, tried to adapt its armor to resist the kinetic impacts. Its surface rippled and hardened, developing new defensive layers within seconds. But human weapons engineers had anticipated this response. Second volley away, Hayes reported as her railguns fired again. This time, the tungsten rods were followed by explosive penetrator rounds that detonated deep inside the bioship's hull. The ancient creature that had consumed countless civilizations found itself burning from the inside out while the space battle raged above. Colonel Janet Williams was leading the most dangerous mission of all. Her marine assault teams had been launched in armored boarding pods, targeting the Void Swarm command ship that was still trying to reach the planet's surface. Williams kicked open the airlock of her pod and stepped into the alien vessel's interior. Her combat armor's lights, revealing corridors that seemed to pulse with organic life behind her. 200 Marines poured out of their own pods, carrying weapons that would have been considered antiques by galactic standards: flamethrowers, explosive charges, and chemical weapons that could eat through almost any organic material. Listen up, Marines, Williams called out over the comm system, her voice steady despite being inside a living nightmare. These things adapt to energy weapons and fancy alien tech, but I bet they've never dealt with good old-fashioned fire and explosives. Remember the Marine motto: when in doubt, add more. Fire. The Void Swarm creatures inside their own ship were completely unprepared for close combat with humans. They had evolved to fight at long range, using biomechanical systems to adapt to incoming attacks. But Marines with flamethrowers, moving through their corridors at close range, was something entirely outside their experience. The ancient creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years, that had consumed entire civilizations and grown stronger with each victory, suddenly found themselves in an unfamiliar position for the first time in their existence. They were the prey instead of the predators, and humanity was just getting started. The news traveled faster than any starship could fly. Within days of the Battle of Kepler-4, every corner of the galaxy had heard the impossible story. The humans, those primitive warriors who had been locked away in their solar system like dangerous animals, had done what the galaxy's greatest civilizations could not. They had not just defeated the Void Swarm, they had made them run away in terror in the crystal halls of the Galactic Council. Emergency sessions ran day and night as delegates tried to understand what they had witnessed. The combat footage from Kepler-4 to be played over and over on massive screens, showing scenes that many council members found difficult to watch. There were human Marines moving through Void Swarm bioships with flamethrowers, Burning everything in their path, soldiers planted explosive charges with the casual efficiency of workers. Doing routine maintenance. Most disturbing of all were the human faces visible through their helmet visors. Focused, almost bored. As if systematic destruction was just another day at the office. Council leader Thyman sat in his private chambers, reviewing the battle reports with his closest advisors. His tentacles moved slowly through the water of his meditation tank, a sign of deep stress among his people. "I've studied warfare for 300 years," he said quietly to his war council. What the humans did at Kepler 44b was not fighting in any sense. We understand they don't engage in combat. They commit systematic extermination with the efficiency of a factory production line. The footage showed human boarding parties moving through alien corridors like they owned them. No hesitation, no mercy, no complex strategies. They simply advanced, destroyed everything in their path, and moved on to the next target. It was brutally effective and absolutely terrifying to civilizations that had spent thousands of years developing rules of warfare and codes of honor. But perhaps the most chilling moment came after the battle was over. Captain Randy Bradley, commanding the human destroyer, U.S. Vengeance, had sent a message directly to the retreating Void Swarm forces. The transmission had been picked up by every communication array in the system and quickly spread across the galaxy. "Attention Void Swarm." Bradley's voice was steady and conversational, like he was ordering lunch rather than delivering a threat to creatures that had consumed billions of lives. "You picked the wrong species to hunt. We've been apex predators since we lived in caves and hunted woolly mammoths with sharpened sticks. We've had 5,000 years to get good at killing things that want to kill us. And frankly, we've gotten very good at it," the message continued. But it was Bradley's closing line that became legendary. "Throughout the galaxy, you're not the scariest thing in the universe anymore. We are. Have a nice day." Within weeks, human ships began appearing throughout the Outer Rim territories, establishing forward bases on worlds that had been abandoned during the swarm's advance. The humans didn't ask permission from local governments or file requests with the Galactic Council. They simply arrived, set up their bases, and began patrolling the area. Their doctrine was simple and effective. When they detected Void Swarm activity, they responded with overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. There were no negotiations, no attempts at communication, no complex battle strategies. They found the enemy and destroyed it completely, then moved on to the next target. General Nathan Davis, newly appointed commander of the Terran Defense Corps, held his first press conference from the bridge of the UES Dominion. Humanity's newest and largest battleship. Reporters from dozens of alien news services attended, though many looked uncomfortable asking questions to someone who wore his weapons as casually as other species wore clothing. General Davis asked a reporter from the Centauri Broadcasting Network, "Many civilizations are concerned about human military tactics. How do you respond to allegations that your methods violate established galactic warfare conventions?" Davis, a veteran of Earth's last global conflict, looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Ma'am, with respect, we don't have energy shields that can stop incoming fire. We don't have adaptive armor that makes us immune to enemy weapons. What we do have is 5,000 years of experience fighting things that are bigger, stronger, and nastier than we are. And we've learned one simple truth. If something wants to kill you, you kill it first, you kill it fast, and you make sure it stays dead." He paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. "The Void Swarm spent 1,000,000 years perfecting the art of consuming civilizations. We spent 5,000 years perfecting the art of not getting consumed. I'd say our approach works better." The effects of human intervention were felt throughout the galaxy. Void Swarm scouting parties that had been probing core systems for months suddenly vanished. The massive bioships that had been massing for final assaults on populated worlds retreated into the dark spaces between stars. Intelligence reports suggested that the swarm's hive mind was in chaos. receiving conflicting information from its scattered forces for the first time in their million-year existence. They had encountered something more dangerous than themselves, and they didn't know how to respond. Some alien civilizations celebrated humanity's success, grateful for the protection of these violent newcomers. Others worried about what would happen when the void swarm threat was finally eliminated. Would humanity simply return to their solar system, or would they decide they liked having influence over galactic affairs? Admiral Morrison, now commanding all human forces in the galaxy, addressed these concerns in his own direct way. We didn't come out here to conquer anybody or build an empire. We came because someone asked for help, and we're the kind of species that answers when people call for help, but we're also the kind of species that finishes what we start. The galaxy had asked for salvation, and humanity had delivered it with interest, but as the void swarm retreated and human ships patrolled former battlegrounds, one question remained unanswered. Now that the monsters were gone, what would the galaxy do with its monstrous protectors? The ancient chambers of the Galactic Council had never felt so tense. 6 months had passed since the impossible victory at Kepler-4, and the galaxy was still trying to figure out what to do with its human saviors. The void swarm had completely disappeared, retreating to whatever dark corner of space they had originally come from. But their absence had created a new problem that nobody had anticipated. The humans weren't going home. Council leader Thyman floated in his ceremonial tank, his tentacles moving in slow, nervous patterns as he watched the assembled delegates file into the chamber. Representatives from over 300 civilizations had come to address what the official agenda, politely called post-conflict territorial arrangements. But everyone knew they were really here to discuss the human problem. Admiral Jack Morrison entered the chamber wearing his full dress uniform, the dark blue fabric decorated with ribbons and medals from battles across a dozen star systems. Each medal told the story of another void swarm defeat, another world liberated, another civilization saved from extinction. Behind him walked his senior staff, their own uniforms similarly decorated, their faces showing the quiet confidence of people who had done the impossible and knew it. The holographic displays around the chamber showed the current state of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas still being cleared of void swarm remnants. Blue zones showed sectors under human patrol, where merchant ships could travel safely for the first time in years. Green zones marked worlds that had been completely liberated and were now rebuilding their civilizations. There were a lot more blue and green zones than anyone had expected. When this all started, Morrison stepped up to the speaker's podium, his weathered face calm as he looked out at the assembled delegates. Many of them couldn't meet his eyes. These were the same beings who had voted to quarantine humanity 2 centuries ago, calling them too violent and primitive to join galactic society. Now, those same primitives were the only things standing between civilization and the darkness between the stars. Honored delegates, Morrison began, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. 6 months ago, you sent us a message asking for help. You told us that 17 star systems had been consumed by the void swarm, that billions of your people were dead, and that your advanced weapons were useless against the enemy. He paused, letting his words sink in. But that message came from the same Galactic Council that had spent 200 years calling humanity too violent and primitive for civilized space. The same council that had quarantined us in our own solar system to protect the galaxy from our barbaric nature. The chamber was silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems and the nervous shuffling of delegates who suddenly found the floor very interesting. You called us savages, Morrison continued, his voice still calm but carrying an edge. Now you said we were too dangerous to be allowed among the peaceful races of the galaxy. But when your elegant energy weapons and sophisticated defensive systems failed against the void swarm, you came begging to those same savages for help. Colonel Rebecca Foster, who had been promoted to serve as military liaison to the council, stepped forward to join Morrison at the podium. She was younger than the admiral, but her uniform carried its own collection of battle ribbons, including the newly created Galactic Liberation medal that had been awarded to every human who had fought in the campaign. "We want to make something very clear," Foster said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had personally led Marines through Void Swarm bioships. "We didn't come out here to conquer your worlds or build a human empire. We came because someone asked for help, and helping people who need it is just what humans do." She gestured to the holographic displays, showing human patrol fleets moving through formerly dangerous sectors of space. "The fact that we turned out to be very good at helping probably says more about the rest of you than it does about us." The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in the Council's long history usually. Territorial agreements took months or even years to work out, with endless debates over trading rights, patrol boundaries, and resource allocations. But the human demands were surprisingly simple. They wanted official recognition as a galactic civilization with full membership rights. They wanted permission to maintain military bases in the sectors they had liberated, and they wanted the authority to respond to future threats without having to ask permission from a council that might spend months debating while civilizations died in exchange. They offered something the galaxy had never had before, a guarantee of protection. The Terran Defense Corps would patrol the spaceways, hunt down any remaining Void Swarm forces, and respond to future threats with the same overwhelming force that had broken the greatest enemy the galaxy had ever known. The vote was much closer than it should have been. Many delegates were still uncomfortable with the idea of officially welcoming such violent beings into galactic society, but fear won over prejudice, just as it had when the original distress call was sent to Earth. By a vote of 212 to 88, humanity was granted full membership in the Galactic Confederation. As the session ended and delegates began filing out of the chamber, Ambassador Vexta approached Morrison. Her crystalline form was glowing with the soft blue patterns that indicated curiosity among her people. "Admiral Morrison," she said, her harmonic voice carrying a note of genuine concern, "may I ask you something in private?" Morrison nodded, gesturing for his staff to wait outside when they were alone. Vexta's glow shifted to the deeper colors that meant she was asking a serious question. "What happens when the galaxy no longer needs your protection?" she asked. "When the Void Swarm is completely eliminated and there are no more threats to face. What will humanity do with all that military power?" Morrison was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. When he finally answered, his smile was warmer and more genuine than any expression he had shown during the formal proceedings. "Ambassador, with all due respect, I hope you never find out," he said, "but if that day does come, I want you to remember something important. We didn't answer your call for help because we wanted to gain power or influence in galactic affairs. We came because helping people in trouble is the right thing to do, and that's not going to change just because we're successful at it." He walked toward the chamber's exit, then paused and looked back at her. The galaxy spent 200 years afraid of what humanity might do to civilized space. Maybe it's time to start thinking about what civilized space has gained from having humanity as part of it. The galaxy had cried out for salvation, and humanity had answered with firepower and fury. Now they would all have to learn how to live together in a universe where the monsters were gone, but the monster hunters remained. It was going to be an interesting future for everyone involved.